Hi, I'm Emily. I'm 35 years old, and I like everything in my life to be neat and organized. I've always been attracted to clarity in detail, whether at home or at work. I work as an auditor in a large company where every little thing matters. My friends often make fun of me, pointing out that I always keep receipts and persistently pay taxes on time. But for me, such habits are not just routine tasks, but a way to control life, to create a sense of order in this chaotic world. Let me tell you how I met my husband Dylan. It happened at one of those rare parties where I was invited by our mutual friends. I remember that evening down to the smallest detail: the soft light of the lamps, the casual conversations, the glass of wine in my hand. I was chatting with my college friends, immersed in nostalgia about my college days, when suddenly the door opened and he came in, Dylan. He was a little older, with a confident, calm gait and a disarming smile that immediately caught my attention. His manners were impeccable, and his voice was deep and confident. He worked as a manager for a large food sales company. "Hi, I'm Dylan. Do you mind if I join you?" "What is it?" he asked, keeping his manner light and casual, as if we had already known each other for many years. I smiled, trying to hide my slight excitement. "I'm Emily, nice to meet you." Our conversation started surprisingly easily, as if we had always known each other. I was amazed at how much we had in common, starting with our passion for classic rock and ending with similar views on life. After a few months of our relationship, Dylan invited me to a family barbecue hosted by his sister Madeline. It was the first time I met his family, and I was worried, as it often happens when you don't know what to expect. Madeline welcomed us warmly and cordially, but her 5 children were a completely different test. They ran around the yard screaming and laughing, scattering toys and causing me slight confusion. "Hey, Madeline, this is Emily," Dylan introduced me, and I tried to keep my polite smile despite the chaos around me. Children ran around, shouted and scattered food all over the yard. I was quietly hoping that Dylan would step in and say something, but he just smiled and shrugged. "Aren't they full of energy?" I forced myself to smile back and barely hid my displeasure. Dylan and I grew closer and closer, and over time our conversations turned to the topic of the future. One day, at the top of a picturesque hill, he proposed to me. It was simple, but sincere, just the way I've always liked it. Our wedding was wonderful, but it was not without one minor problem: Madeline's children. All day long they were running, making a mess and making noise. Madeline didn't mind, and Dylan seemed to find it funny. "Look at them, they're having so much fun," he said with a smile, watching as one of the children spilled a drink, and the other made a real mess of snacks in a small corner. A few months after the wedding, Dylan and I decided to take the next step in our lives: to buy a house. We lived in a cozy rented apartment for a long time, but the desire to have our own place always burned in my heart. One evening, sitting on the couch after work, we discussed our new life stage. "Emily, we need to sort out our finances," Dylan said, leaning back on the couch. I nodded, realizing that this was an important step in our future. "I can start buying furniture and appliances," I began. Dylan smiled. "And I'm thinking about buying you a new car. Your old one has been causing problems for a long time, right?" Dylan offered me a new car, and I was surprised and incredibly happy. "Really, that would be amazing." My old car was already literally falling apart on the move, and the thought that soon I would be able to drive something reliable and modern filled me with joy. "Yes, I saw your old car struggling for its life," he said with a smile. "It's time for you to do something more reliable." We soon started looking for a house. It was an exciting but stressful process. After several weeks of inspection, discussion, and reflection, we finally found the right house, the one that we both liked. It was a little more expensive than we expected, but moving in and creating our own cozy space seemed worth it. This house was like a white sheet, ready to become ours. Inside, I was filled with inspiration at the thought of how I would decorate it, choosing every detail so that everything would be the way I like it. At the same time, Dylan surprised me with a new car, shiny, elegant, and modern. It was the smoothest car I could have ever dreamed of. I couldn't contain my emotions and literally screamed with joy when I saw her in front of the house. Dylan, this is incredible. Thank you very much. I couldn't stop hugging him. His eyes shone with pride. Please, Emily, you deserve this, he said, slightly embarrassed by my delight, but clearly pleased with himself. When we settled into our new home, everything seemed to be going just fine. We both enjoyed our work, our weekends were a real treat, the house was our cozy refuge filled with love and tranquility. But as time went on, little things started to bother me. What used to be funny about Dylan, his laid-back attitude to life and lack of concern for the little things, began to annoy. Especially when it came to household chores. Dylan, can you help me with the dishes tonight? I asked one day after dinner, trying not to show my annoyance. He looked up from the phone and said with some fatigue, I've had a long day, can we leave it for tomorrow? His pleading eyes looked at me like I was a schoolteacher who didn't want to get another two. I sighed. Dylan, we can't keep putting things off. I'm tired too, but the house needs to be kept in order. He sighed heavily, got up from the sofa and reluctantly picked up the dishes. It was a small thing, but there were more and more such moments. A few months passed, and I began to worry about our marriage for another reason. Dylan and I tried to have a baby, but nothing worked. An inner voice whispered anxiously that something was wrong. I went to the doctor, and he assured me that everything was fine, it just needed time and patience. But it was easier said than done. Every setback eroded my confidence, especially when Madeline, Dylan's sister, and her 5 children constantly came to visit us. Madeline lived in a neighboring state, but judging by the frequency of her visits, it seemed that she lived just around the corner. Every time she came, her appearance turned into a little family hurricane. She constantly complained about her husband, and her children caused real chaos in our house. At dinner, when we were trying to relax after a hard day, Madeline would start talking about her family dramas. Emily, you won't believe what Richard has done this time, she would begin, rolling her eyes. At some point, I couldn't stand it. Madeline, can we talk about something else? I tried to politely steer the conversation in a different direction. Oh, come on, Emily, I need to talk, you always understand me. Madeline completely missed the hint. Her children, meanwhile, were running around, fighting, throwing toys and food around like little tornadoes. I could hardly contain myself. After a long week at work, I just wanted some peace and quiet, but it was impossible when they were in our house. Guys, can you calm down, please? I asked, barely able to contain my irritation, when they started racing around the living room again. Why are you always so tense, Emily? Madeline snapped. Every time I tried to bring order or even a little discipline, she took it as a personal insult. Madeline, they're making a mess. I just cleaned the house. My voice trembled with tension as my patience began to melt. Maybe if you had children of your own, you would understand, Madeline suddenly blurted out, her words seeming to slap me in the face. I was stunned. How could she say that? She knew what I was going through, how worried I was about not being able to get pregnant. It was like a punch in the stomach. I stared at her in disbelief. And even worse, Dylan was sitting next to me, silent, not saying a word in my defense. I could barely keep from bursting into tears. Dylan, are you going to let her talk to me like that? My voice was shaking with anger. Down. You're making a big deal out of nothing, Dylan said with such calmness that my blood froze in my veins. How could he? By siding with his sister again, he didn't even try to see how I was suffering. A big deal out of nothing? I screamed, feeling tears start to come to my eyes. She just insulted me in my own house. The voice broke, despair sounded in every word. I couldn't take this constant disrespect anymore, this disregard for my feelings. Every time Madeline came with her children, our house turned into chaos, and Dylan invariably took her side. It was more than I could bear. Something has to change, I thought, as anger built up inside me like a storm. One Sunday, when I was already trying to come to terms with another visit from Madeline, She appeared on the doorstep with 5 children. She didn't even bother to explain at length. "Emily, I need a break from parenting. I'm going shopping," she said, as if there was nothing strange about it. Take a break from parenting? I almost laughed out loud. Madeline hardly understood what it meant to be a mother, certainly not in the way I imagined it. Every time she came, her children turned our house into a zoo, and I didn't have a moment's peace. "Fine, Madeline, but you better hurry up," I said, feeling a nervousness begin to build up inside, foreshadowing another portion of chaos. "Thank you, Emily, you're a lifeline." She chirped happily, as if she had left some little angels instead of children for me, and rushed out the door without even looking back. I went back to the kitchen, where I was trying to cook dinner. I've always loved this process. It calmed me down, allowed me to focus on something simple and pleasant. But when Madeline's children were in the house, cooking was almost impossible. They were running around, shouting, making a mess. My nerves were stretched to the limit. I shouted from the kitchen, hoping for a miracle. But, as expected, they didn't pay any attention to me. Suddenly I heard a loud crash and my heart stopped. I rushed into the living room, and what I saw made my heart clench with anger and pain. On the floor, among the shards, lay my grandfather's antique Chinese vase, a priceless family heirloom, broken into pieces. "What happened here?" I shouted, looking at the guilty children who stood in a corner and avoided looking into my eyes. "We were just playing," one of them muttered, not daring to meet my gaze. "This vase is priceless. It belonged to my grandfather." My voice was shaking with rage. At that moment, Dylan entered the room, as usual, calm and indifferent to what was happening. "Emily, it's just a vase," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "We can fix it." I looked at him as if he were a stranger. "It's not about the vase, Dylan," I shouted. "This is disrespectful. Every time Madeline comes, our house turns into chaos, and you don't care." Tears of betrayal and disappointment stood in my eyes. Just then, Madeline returned with her shopping, looking annoyed at the noise coming from the living room. "What's going on here?" "What is it?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "Your children broke my grandfather's vase." I pointed to the pieces on the floor, trying to hold back tears. Madeline took a quick look at the mess, but didn't even try to apologize. "Well, maybe you should have looked after them more closely, Emily," she said indifferently. My heart skipped a beat. "Are you kidding? They're your children, Madeline. I shouldn't be watching them." My voice was breaking, my hands were shaking with anger. Dylan just shook his head as if none of this mattered. "You're overreacting, Emily. It's just a vase. Leave it alone." That was the last straw. "I can't take it anymore," I screamed, tears breaking through all the barriers. Dylan stood silently, cold, and Madeline was grinning as if she had won some hidden game. I felt like something inside of me was collapsing. With a scream full of anger and resentment, I ran out of the room, leaving them frozen in silence. A few weeks later, everything continued according to the usual scenario. Madeline would come, the kids would make a mess, and Dylan would invariably take her side. But one morning, at breakfast, when I was just trying not to think about the day ahead, Dylan calmly, as if discussing the weather, broke the news to me. "Emily, I need to tell you something. Madeline is getting divorced, and she and the children are moving in with us for a few months." I almost dropped my coffee cup. "Are you serious?" My voice was shaking with shock and disbelief. "Our house already looks like a madhouse when they come for a day. How should we deal with them, living here for months?" "She's my sister, Emily," Dylan said coldly, his gaze piercing through me. "She needs our help. You should be more understanding." He looked at me as if I was the one being unreasonable and moody, as if I was the one building a problem out of nothing. But I knew I was right. I understood him too well. But the situation was unbearable. "I don't mind helping, Dylan, but this is too much. Why can't we rent her a place?" My words sounded like a last attempt to save at least something from what once seemed like a normal life. I'll even pay for the first month's rent, I added, trying to stay calm. I hoped that at least this would convince him. But his answer was ruthlessly simple: no. She'll be better off here. Plus you can help with the kids and keep the house in order. As if it was the most obvious thing in the world. As if I just have to become a nanny and a cleaner. I'm not a babysitter, Dylan. I'm working too, and I need to relax when I get home. My frustration was boiling. It was hard for me to breathe. Stop being so selfish, Emily. This is a family, they need us. His tone became increasingly harsh. Selfish? Everything exploded inside me. I'm just asking for a fair solution. I don't want my life to be turned upside down. But Dylan wasn't listening anymore. They're coming tomorrow night, so you better get used to the idea, he said, getting up from the table and leaving me alone in the room, as if nothing important had just happened. The next morning, I woke up early, still overcome with anger and resentment after yesterday's quarrel. The feeling of betrayal was so deep that it pulled me down like a stone tied to my feet. I got dressed for work, trying to focus on the usual things. Picking up my bag, I headed for the exit, but when I went to the hangar, I couldn't find the car keys. They were nowhere to be found. I called Dylan. He answered too calmly, which only made me even angrier. I took the car. She's mine, remember? His voice sounded even, as if it was something that was taken for granted. I'm giving it to Madeline so she can take the kids. I froze. You? Are you giving my car to Madeline? The words barely passed through my throat. Are you serious? It's not your car right now, Emily. I paid for her, and Madeline needs her more than you do. His indifference was the last straw. This is the last straw, Dylan. I said, feeling my voice tremble with rage. You took everything from me, and I'm done. But Dylan seemed unable to understand. Don't be dramatic, Emily. His voice was tired, as if I was the one throwing a tantrum over nothing. When I hung up, everything was boiling inside me. It was a nightmare and I couldn't wake up. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer stay in this situation. Picking up the phone, I made one of the most difficult calls of my life. Hello, I need a team to move, yes, today. It's urgent. A couple of hours later, the movers arrived. I showed them the house and pointed out the furniture. Take everything. Beds, sofas, chandeliers, even faucets in the bathroom. The house was empty before our eyes. With each item I took out, I felt a strange relief, as if a heavy weight was gradually being lifted from my shoulders. When the last item was loaded into the truck, I directed them to my mom's house. Everyone there, thanks for your quickness. I handed the movers a tip and, taking the most necessary things, went to my mother. A few hours later, my phone started vibrating. Dylan called again and again, but I ignored him. I felt a mixture of anxiety and relief every minute. I was scared, but at the same time I felt that I had finally taken my life in hand. In the evening, there was a loud knock on the door of my mother's house. I opened the door and Dylan was standing in the doorway. His face was red with rage, and his eyes were boring right through me. What the hell, Emily? What did you do? He stormed into the living room, yelling at me like I was the enemy. I've got my stuff, Dylan. You took the car, so I took what I bought. I tried to stay calm despite the internal storm. This is crazy. You've stripped the house naked. Where should Madeline and the children sleep? His scream echoed through the room, but I didn't let him break me. That's your problem, Dylan. You made this mess, now you deal with it yourself. He exploded. You're a thief, Emily. You stole everything. His hands waved in the air as if he was trying to grab onto something invisible. I didn't steal anything, I replied calmly, taking a folder of checks out of my bag. Here is the proof of purchase of all furniture and household appliances. It all belongs to me. Dylan grabbed the folder and started going through the receipts. His anger was gradually fading, replaced by disappointment. "Okay, Emily," he said, throwing the folder on the table. "If you want to play like that, I'll file for divorce." I took a deep breath and handed Dylan a stack of ready-made papers. His hands were not shaking, there was a strange calmness in his soul, as if all the worries of the past months had become just a background that was about to disappear. "Here are the divorce papers," I said with a firmness I hadn't expected from myself. "Sign them and we'll be done." He stared at the papers, his face pale, as if all the words he had been preparing in his head had lost their power. He froze, holding these sheets in his hands, as if he couldn't believe that this was really happening. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" "Damn serious, Dylan," my words sounded like a hammer blow. Every word carried the accumulated weight of pain and disappointment that I had been collecting inside myself for so long. I deserve better than this. And for the first time, I said it out loud. I really deserve better. Dylan nodded silently, his gaze blank, as if something had collapsed inside him. He took a pen out of his pocket, still without saying a word, and signed the papers. The gesture was so simple, so final, that the moment he returned them to me, I felt the world around me change. "All right, Emily. Have it your way," he said, his voice hoarse and quiet, as if he had just realized that everything was really over. He turned and walked out, the door slamming shut with a sharp sound that echoed through the house like the echo of his departure. I stood there for a while longer, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It's over. And although my heart ached from this bitter finality, I knew it was the right decision. That evening, I sat down with my mom at the kitchen table and told her everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting, her gaze was full of warmth and understanding. "You've been through a lot, Emily," she said, hugging me tightly, just like when I was a kid, when everything seemed so much easier. "Now it's time for you to focus on yourself and your happiness." "Thank you, Mom," I whispered, feeling a weight like a huge stone fall off my shoulders. "All I need now is time. It's time to realize, to rebuild yourself and your world in order to gain a new sense of stability." The next few days were spent arranging a new daily routine. I was gradually getting used to the fact that my life had changed, that I was building it from scratch again. I lived with my mother, in the house that was my refuge, but there was an understanding in my soul that soon this shelter would become temporary for me. I needed something of my own, something small and cozy where I could start with a clean slate. One morning I was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, looking through the ads on my laptop, and suddenly I stopped at one of them. "Mom, I think I found the perfect place," I said, feeling a little nervous. It was a small apartment in the city center, just a few blocks from my work. I showed her the photos. Mom looked over my shoulder and smiled. "This looks good, Emily. Have you called the realtor yet?" "Not yet, but I'm going to do it right now," I replied, dialing the number and listening to the phone rings in the silence of the room. After several calls, a friendly voice came on the other end of the line. "Hi, this is Larry. How can I help you?" "Hello, Larry. My name is Emily. I am interested in the apartment in the city center that you indicated in the ad. Is she still available?" Fingers crossed, I waited for an answer, as if my entire future depended on it. "Yes, she's still free," Larry's voice was full of hope. "Do you want to schedule a viewing?" "How about tomorrow?" I suggested, trying to speak as calmly as possible, although everything inside was boiling with anticipation. "This will do," he said. "See you at 1600 hours." We ended the conversation, and I anxiously began to prepare for the next day. The next day, I went downtown to meet Larry and inspect the apartment. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me outside the building, with a friendly smile on his face. "Hi, Emily, nice to meet you," he said, shaking my hand. "Let me show you around." The apartments turned out to be exactly as I had imagined. Small, but cozy. It had a nice kitchen, a spacious living room, and even a small balcony overlooking the city. It was the perfect place for me to start over. "This is what I need, Larry." I'll take her, I said, feeling a wave of relief rise inside me. After signing the lease and receiving the keys, I started planning my move. There was a lot of work ahead, but I was determined to make this new space my own, my new home. Thank you, Mom, I'm really looking forward to it, I replied, smiling as we drove up to my new apartment. With my mom and friends, we quickly unloaded things from the car and began to arrange the space. The process was easy, and soon everything was in place. I looked around, slowly walking through the rooms where my things were now, and a sense of accomplishment came over me. The excitement and joy of this new beginning filled me completely. My new apartment was small but cozy, and every corner was already beginning to find its function and meaning. The walls are still empty, the boxes are not completely disassembled, but here I could finally breathe freely, feeling that this place would become a real home. I was proud of myself for every step that brought me here, for the courage to break old chains and start with a clean slate. There was silence and tranquility inside. For the first time in a long time, I felt harmony. In the evening, I decided to have a small dinner in honor of the move. I invited my mother and some close friends. We ordered pizza, and sitting right on the floor, surrounded by boxes and loud laughter, we celebrated this event. Julie, an old friend of mine, raised her glass of soda and toasted, to Emily in her new place. May this house bring you happiness and peace. Thanks, guys, I replied with warmth in my voice. At that moment, I felt really happy, surrounded by people who supported me through difficult times. Laughter filled the room, and I soaked up every minute of the evening, enjoying the lightness that I had been missing for so long. After the guests left, I was left alone, going out onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The city stretched out in front of me, lights twinkling in the distance, creating the illusion of infinity. Sitting there, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The journey to this point had been long and full of difficulties, but now I felt free like never before. I was proud of myself for taking control of my life, for finding the strength to walk away from a toxic relationship. After a while, I found out from mutual friends that Dylan, my ex-husband, used his share of the sale of our house to buy a small apartment. He lived there with Madeline and her 5 children. Despite all his efforts, their life was far from idyllic. Dylan worked 2 jobs to keep up with the constant bills, while Madeline was still not working. According to rumors, they were constantly fighting, and their relationship was clearly on the verge. One evening, my phone suddenly rang. I looked at the screen and saw Dylan's name. Surprise flooded over me. Why did he suddenly decide to call me? I hesitated, but finally decided to answer. Curiosity got the better of me. Hi, Dylan. What happened? I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Emily, please just listen to me, he began with desperation in his voice, as if this was his last chance. I know I screwed up. I'm really sorry for everything. I didn't realize how difficult it was for you with Madeline and her children. I couldn't help but laugh sarcastically. Really, Dylan? Did you realize that just now, after all the time that has passed? Yes, I know it's late, but I'm serious, Emily. I've been thinking about it a lot. I miss you. I miss us. Can we start all over again? I'm ready to move in with you and fix everything. His voice trembled with despair, as if he saw no other way out. I grinned, shaking my head in disbelief. You've got to be kidding, Dylan. Do you think you can just come back into my life as if nothing had happened? I said with firmness in my voice, but at the same time feeling a little sorry for him. Emily, I'm serious. His despair only intensified. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll even take on more work to make it up to you. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Dylan, it's over. I'm happy without you. I'm not going back to this mess. Please, Emily. This time it will be different. I've changed. His voice sounded pleading, but I couldn't take him seriously anymore. Dylan, I found my world without you, and I'm not going to give it up for your chaos, I replied, firmly standing my ground. Take care of yourself, Dylan. I hope you find your way. With these words, I hung up the phone, feeling relieved and complete. Dylan was a part of my past, but I couldn't let him bring me back to the life I'd worked so hard to get out of. Later that day, I met Julie for coffee. We were sitting in our favorite cozy cafe, where the air was saturated with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked croissants. "You won't believe who called me today," I said, rolling my eyes and stirring my cup. Julie raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Dylan?" We spent the rest of the day chatting and laughing, and every moment I realized more and more how far I had come from the life I once shared with Dylan. This new chapter was mine, calm, filled with joy and confidence. I had created a world for myself in which the chaos of the past no longer had a place, and I was not going to let anyone destroy it. The cafe where Julie and I were sitting was cozy, with soft lights playing on the wooden walls and quiet melodic music that only complemented our conversation. The light rays of the setting sun penetrated through the large windows, filling everything with a warm golden light, as if the day itself was ending in harmony with my inner feelings. When the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, Julie and I decided to take a walk along the river. The soft whisper of the water and the light breeze caressing her face brought with them a feeling of freedom. "I can't believe how much everything has changed in the last few months," I said, looking at the play of light on the surface of the river. The lights of the city reflected in the water like small twinkling stars, and this sight filled me with a special calmness. Julie looked at me warmly, putting her hand on my back. "You've come a long way, Emily, and I'm so proud of you. You are stronger than you can imagine." I smiled at her, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Julie. You know, I feel like I've finally closed this chapter of my life. So much is behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I feel really good." A feeling of relief spread through me like a long-awaited rain on a dry land. We continued our walk in silence, but it was the same silence that does not require words, only the enjoyment of the moment. I was busy for the next few days, but it was a pleasant occupation. I began to get used to the new routine, organizing the space around me, rediscovering the joy of independent living. Although I was temporarily staying at my mom's house, her house was so warm and welcoming that every day seemed like another step towards restoring inner balance. Mom was always there for me, supporting me in everything. She gave me the opportunity to feel safe and build up my strength for further achievements. I enjoyed decorating my room, making it my little sanctuary. My favorite paintings found their place on the walls, books on the shelves, and a cozy corner by the window became the place where I could immerse myself in my thoughts, with a book in my hands or just admiring the sunset. It was a place where I finally felt completely safe, far from the chaos of previous years. One evening, while sorting out the last box of things, Mom knocked on the door and came in with 2 cups of hot tea. She sat down on the edge of the bed and handed me one of the cups, saying, "I thought you might need a break." "Thanks, Mom," I replied with a smile, taking a sip. The warm fragrant tea spread over the body, bringing with it a feeling of coziness and comfort. The familiar taste seemed to take me back to the days when everything seemed simpler and clearer. Mom looked at me carefully, her eyes shining with tenderness. "You've been through a lot, Emily. It's time to focus on yourself and your happiness," she said, hugging me. "You're right, Mom," I replied softly, feeling the tension leave my body. "It just takes time to figure it out." I looked around my room, feeling like every corner of it was beginning to fill with meaning and peace. The following days passed quickly, but they were satisfying. I started planning my future steps, exploring new opportunities and making plans for the future. It felt like a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly excited about what lay ahead. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk in the park nearby. The weather was wonderful, clear skies, a light breeze, and the fresh smell of autumn leaves filled the air. I walked along the shady alleys, inhaling this smell of change, and reflected on how much my life had changed in recent months. There was a deep sense of satisfaction in my heart, as if every part of me had finally come into harmony. While walking, I unexpectedly met old friends. We talked for a long time, remembering old times, laughing at past nonsense and making plans to meet more often. It was so nice to know that despite all the changes, I still had people who were always there, supporting and sincerely rejoicing at my success. When the evening shadows grew longer, I returned home feeling full and happy. Yes, the road ahead did not promise to be easy, but I was ready to meet all its challenges with courage and confidence. I regained control of my life and knew that now I would not allow anyone to disrupt my newfound peace and happiness.